Your resistance to transformation is the transformation. Write that down. The 7 signs I'm about to reveal aren't symptoms of approaching change. They are the change itself, disguised as obstacles. For decades, patients came to me saying, "I feel stuck," or "nothing's working," or "I'm more confused than ever." I used to treat these as problems to solve. Then I discovered the truth. These feelings of stuckness, this confusion, this sense that everything's falling apart, they're not blocking your transformation. They're the evidence it's already occurring. You're not waiting for your life to transform. You're living inside the transformation and calling it crisis. Let me show you what you've been missing. You're exhausted by transformation content that promises change but delivers only temporary motivation. You've watched countless videos, read the books, tried the morning routines, and yet you still feel fundamentally unchanged, wondering if something is broken in you that prevents the breakthrough everyone else seems to access. Here's the truth no one wants to tell you. You're not failing to transform. You're failing to recognize that transformation is already happening. For over 40 years, I've worked with the human unconscious, and I've discovered that we've been taught a complete lie about how change occurs. We've been sold a fantasy that transformation is a destination you reach through willpower, positive thinking, and the right set of steps. This is precisely backwards. You feel simultaneously desperate for change and terrified of it. You interpret your confusion as failure. You think your resistance means you're not ready. You believe that other people have some secret you lack, some internal strength, some clarity, some magic formula that makes change feel natural instead of impossible. This creates a vicious cycle. You want transformation. You can't seem to create it, so you conclude something is wrong with you, which makes you work harder at the wrong things, which exhausts you further, which proves in your mind that you're broken. But what if I told you that this very cycle, this very frustration, is not evidence of your failure, but evidence of your readiness? What if the confusion itself is clarity in disguise? Transformation isn't something you do, it's something you stop preventing. The 7 signs I'm revealing aren't preparations for change. They're the unconscious mind's way of dismantling your defenses against change. When you learn to recognize them, you'll stop fighting yourself and start collaborating with forces already at work within you. You see, we've been taught that transformation requires clarity, motivation, and a plan. This is the myth that keeps you stuck. The reality is far more beautiful and far more terrifying. Transformation requires confusion, resistance, and surrender to what you don't understand. The most profound changes in my patients' lives occurred not when they finally understood themselves, but when they gave up trying to. This video will teach you to read the signs of your own unconscious revolution, the one happening beneath your awareness, preparing you for a life you cannot yet imagine but are already becoming worthy of. Most advice tells you what to do. I'm going to teach you what to notice. Most content tries to motivate you toward change. I'm going to help you recognize that change is already in motion, and your job is simply to stop standing in its way. This isn't inspiration, it's instruction in reading the language your psyche speaks when it's ready to evolve. And I promise you, by the end of our time together today, you will never look at your struggles the same way again. Let me take you back to Vienna, 1897. I was developing what would become psychoanalysis, convinced that the key to transformation was uncovering hidden memories and making the unconscious conscious. I had built my early career on this principle. I believed that if we could simply drag the hidden contents of the mind into the light of awareness, healing would follow automatically. It was a beautiful theory. It was logical. It made sense to my colleagues, and it was incomplete in ways I couldn't yet see. Then I had a dream that challenged everything. In this dream, I was climbing a mountain that kept shifting beneath my feet. Every time I found solid ground, it would dissolve. The stone would turn to sand, the sand would turn to water, and I would find myself scrambling for the next foothold. I spent the entire dream frustrated, angry, trying to force the mountain to solidify through sheer will. I shouted at it. I pounded my fists. I demanded that it behave according to natural law. But the mountain was indifferent to my demands. It kept shifting, kept changing, kept refusing to be what I needed it to be. Then, just before waking, something in me gave up. I stopped fighting. I stopped trying to make the ground solid. And in that moment of surrender, I realized I was no longer climbing, I was flying. The instant I accepted the shifting ground, I discovered I no longer needed it. I woke up irritated, convinced this was simply wish fulfillment, nothing more. Just my mind compensating for the frustrations of my waking life. For 3 months, I dismissed it. I wrote it in my dream journal and moved on, thinking it was merely interesting but not important. Then a patient came to me, a woman I'll call Anna, though that wasn't her real name. She'd been in analysis for 2 years with no progress. She came faithfully, 3 times a week, lay on my couch, and spoke about her childhood, her marriage, her fears. We had uncovered memories. We had made connections. We had brought unconscious material into consciousness. And yet, nothing changed. She was still paralyzed by anxiety, still unable to make decisions, still living a life that felt, in her words, like wearing clothes that belonged to someone else. This particular session, she was describing her week, and suddenly I heard her say something I'd heard dozens of times before, but had never truly heard. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Not metaphorically. She genuinely felt her sense of self dissolving. She described it as standing on ground that kept disappearing beneath her feet. The words hit me like lightning. She was describing my dream. She was living my dream. And in that moment, I understood something that would change the course of my work forever. She wasn't losing her mind. She was losing her false mind, the constructed identity that was preventing her authentic self from emerging. Every symptom I had been trying to cure, every anxiety I had been trying to eliminate, every bit of confusion I had been trying to clarify, these weren't obstacles to her transformation. They were the transformation itself, and both she and I had been fighting against it. I changed my approach in that very session. Instead of trying to help her find solid ground, I asked, what if the ground is supposed to shift? What if your mind is supposed to feel like it's dissolving? What if this isn't a problem to solve, but a process to allow? The look on her face was unforgettable. It was as if I had given her permission to stop drowning. Within 3 weeks of this realization, her entire life restructured itself. Not because she did anything different, but because she stopped fighting what was already happening. She left her marriage, not out of anger, but out of clarity. She changed careers, not out of desperation, but out of alignment. She became, in her own words, someone she didn't recognize, but had always been. That experience taught me something radical about the 7 signs I'm about to share with you. But first, you need to understand why your mind is designed to hide transformation from you, even as it's orchestrating it. Let me tell you a story that will make this clear. Imagine you're a caterpillar. You've built a perfect life. You know which. Leaves taste best. Which branches are safest. Which other caterpillars to trust. You've mastered the art of being a caterpillar. You have routines, relationships, a sense of identity. When other caterpillars ask who you are, you can answer confidently. You know your place in the world. You understand the rules. You've become competent at this life. Then one day, something disturbing begins. You feel an unexplainable restlessness. Food that once satisfied you now feels empty. The leaves taste like dust in your mouth. Relationships that once mattered feel shallow. Conversations that used to engage you now bore you. The branch you called home suddenly feels like a prison. You look around at the other caterpillars going about their lives and you think, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be happy with this? Why do I feel so ungrateful, so dissatisfied, so wrong? You assume something is broken. Perhaps you're depressed. Perhaps you've lost your way. Perhaps you need better caterpillar. Strategies, a new branch, different leaves, more interesting caterpillar friends. So you try all of these things. You move to a new branch. You sample different leaves. You force yourself to engage with the caterpillar community. And none of it works. The restlessness grows. The dissatisfaction deepens. You feel like you're going crazy. But here's what you don't know. What you cannot know from your caterpillar perspective. Your cells are already transforming. Your DNA has activated instructions for wings you cannot imagine. Your body is preparing for flight, and your caterpillar mind is interpreting this preparation as breakdown. The restlessness isn't a problem, it's a signal. The dissatisfaction isn't ingratitude, it's evolutionary pressure. The sense that something is wrong isn't evidence of malfunction, it's evidence that you're becoming something your current identity cannot comprehend. So you do what any reasonable caterpillar would do. You try harder to be a better caterpillar. You resist the restlessness. You force yourself to enjoy the leaves. You cling to the branch. You double down on caterpillar strategies. And in doing so, you fight against your own metamorphosis. You interpret the early signs of transformation as symptoms to eliminate rather than signals to follow. Eventually, if you're fortunate, something in you gives up. You stop fighting. You surrender to the strange compulsion to build a chrysalis. You stop asking why, stop trying to make sense of it, and simply follow the inexplicable urge to encase yourself in darkness. And here's the crucial part. Inside that chrysalis, you don't become a better caterpillar. You completely dissolve. Your form liquefies. Scientists call this histolysis, the breaking down of tissue. There's a stage where you are neither caterpillar nor butterfly. You are soup. You are chaos. You are nothing recognizable. If someone could look inside the chrysalis at that moment, they wouldn't see a creature. Transforming, they'd see a creature dying. But hidden within that soup are clusters of cells called imaginal discs. These cells have been there since you were a caterpillar, but dormant, waiting. They carry the blueprint for wings, and when the caterpillar structure dissolves, these imaginal cells activate. They use the raw material of what you were to build, what you're becoming. The butterfly doesn't emerge from the caterpillar, it emerges from the dissolution of the caterpillar. This is what human transformation actually looks like. The 7 signs I'm about to reveal are your chrysalis building. They feel like crisis because your caterpillar self can only interpret them as death. But they're not. They're metamorphoses. Asterisk. Asterisk. Sign number 4. You're becoming allergic to small talk. Asterisk. Asterisk. And I mean this viscerally. Someone starts telling you about the weather, about their new car, about celebrity gossip, and you feel something physically recoil inside you. It's not that you think you're superior, quite the opposite. You suddenly feel like you're suffocating. You know that feeling when you're in a conversation and you can times the script everyone's following? How are you? Fine. You? Busy. Same. And somewhere deep inside you want to scream, but are you actually fine? What keeps you awake at night? What do you fear? What makes you feel alive? Your tolerance for performative living has completely evaporated. You can't pretend anymore that discussing parking spaces and quarterly reports feels meaningful when you've just had your entire worldview dismantled. You've seen behind the curtain. You've realized that most of what we call normal conversation is actually an elaborate ritual to avoid saying anything real at all. This makes you feel like an alien at social gatherings. While everyone else seems perfectly content discussing Netflix shows and vacation plans, you're standing there thinking about mortality, meaning, and whether any of this matters. Here's what's really happening. You're no longer willing to abandon yourself for social acceptance. For years, you participated in these shallow exchanges because that's what kept you connected to the tribe. But now, the cost of that connection, which is self-abandonment, has become higher than the fear of being alone. This isn't misanthropy. It's integrity trying to emerge. Your psyche is saying, I will not dilute myself anymore just to make others comfortable with their own avoidance. And yes, this will make some people uncomfortable. They'll call you intense, or too deep, or not fun anymore. What they're really saying is, your authenticity is reflecting back to me how much I'm still hiding from myself, and I don't like it. Asterisk, asterisk. Sign number 5. Patterns everywhere you look. Asterisk, asterisk. This one's fascinating. You start noticing that the same dynamic keeps repeating in different costumes. Your relationship with your partner echoes your relationship with your mother. Your conflict with your boss mirrors your conflict with your father. The friend who betrayed you? She's the third person in 5 years who's done almost the exact same thing. At first, this feels like terrible luck. Why does this keep happening to me? You ask the universe, as if you're some cosmic punching bag. But then, and this is the awakening moment, you realize, asterisk, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you, asterisk. Every wound you've ever received has been a tutorial disguised as tragedy. That betrayal that shattered your trust? It taught you discernment, the ability to distinguish between those who deserve access to your inner world and those who are merely tourists. That failure that left you humiliated? It stripped away the false identity you'd been carrying like armor, revealing the raw, authentic self underneath. The universe doesn't punish you with suffering. It educates you through contrast. You cannot know light without darkness, cannot appreciate health without illness, cannot recognize love without having tasted its absence. Your pain is the tuition you pay for wisdom, and my God, you're earning a doctorate. Consider the lotus flower, that beautiful symbol Eastern philosophy offers us. It grows in mud, in filth, in the murkiest waters imaginable. But it doesn't grow times despite times, the mud. It grows times because times of it. The mud is not its obstacle, it's its nourishment. Your suffering is your mud, and you, whether you realize it yet or not, are the lotus pushing toward the surface. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Asterisk. You've been complicit in your own suffering. Asterisk. Before you recoil, before you accuse me of victim blaming, understand this distinction. I'm not saying you times cause times the harm done to you. I'm saying you've unconsciously chosen to times remain times in it long after the initial wound healed. You've made a home in your trauma. You've arranged the furniture, hung pictures on the walls, invited it to dinner. Why? Because suffering, for all its agony, offers something intoxicating. Asterisk identity. Asterisk. When you are the wounded one, you know who you are. You have a story. You have a role. People ask, how are you? And you have an answer that makes you feel significant, even if that significance is built on pain. The ego, that clever little tyrant, would rather be miserable and certain than happy and unknown, because that is the dirtiest secret of all, the one we hide even from ourselves. Asterisk comfort lives in the familiar, even when the familiar is agony. Asterisk. You think you want to change. You buy the books, You listen to the podcasts? You make the declarations on New Year's Eve with champagne still wet on your lips? But when morning comes, when the real work appears, something in you recoils. Not because change is impossible, no, but because change demands you become someone you've never met. And that, my friend, terrifies you more than staying exactly where you are. I see this pattern repeat itself endlessly. The woman who finally leaves her toxic relationship, only to find herself drawn to the same unavailable men wearing different faces. The man who escapes his authoritarian father, who then builds a career under bosses who treat him with the exact same contempt. They change the scenery, yes, they rearrange the furniture, but the architecture of suffering, that remains untouched. Why? Because we are not merely repeating patterns, we are times completing times them. The unconscious mind is like a composer obsessed with finishing a symphony begun in childhood. It doesn't care if the melody is beautiful or dissonant. It only cares about resolution, about finally getting it right, about transforming the ending. You were powerless then. So you recreate the situation now, where you have agency, where you can theoretically change the outcome. Except you never do. Because the script is too deeply embedded, too rehearsed. You know all the lines by heart. And here is what breaks my heart about human beings. Asterisk, we would rather be right about our suffering than free from it, asterisk. Think about that. Truly think about it. If you've spent 30 years believing you're unworthy of love, and suddenly someone offers you genuine affection without conditions, without games, what happens? Does gratitude flood through you? Does relief? No. Suspicion arrives first. Asterisk. What do they want? What's wrong with them that they'd want me? When will the other shoe drop? Asterisk. You cannot accept what contradicts your deepest beliefs about yourself. So you do what you must. You sabotage it. You push them away. You find their flaws. You create the very rejection you've been preparing for all along. And when they finally leave, asterisk. Finally, asterisk. The world makes sense again. But, and here's where the entire facade crumbles, this sense of order is an entime's illusion, asterisk. A beautiful, seductive, utterly convincing illusion that we've constructed to protect ourselves from a far more unsettling truth. The truth is this: you don't actually know why times you feel this way. You can't, because the forces that shape your emotions don't operate in the bright daylight of consciousness. They work in the shadows, in the deep caverns of your mind where words and logic cannot reach. This is what I spent my life trying to show the world, that we are not the rational masters of our inner lives that we pretend to be. We are, instead, driven by forces we barely understand, primitive urges, ancient fears, wounds we don't remember receiving but can never quite heal. And we times hate this. We hate it so profoundly that we will do almost anything to avoid acknowledging it. So we tell stories. We construct elaborate narratives that make us feel like we're in control. I'm upset because he didn't text me back. Sounds so much better. So much more times manageable, asterisk. Then I'm experiencing a terror of abandonment that has roots in my earliest experiences of dependency. And this minor social interaction has triggered defensive mechanisms I developed before I could even speak. One sounds like a solvable problem. The other sounds like, well, like something you might need therapy for. And this is precisely why we rationalize. Not to understand ourselves better, but to times avoid times understanding ourselves. To keep the uncomfortable truths at bay. To maintain the fiction that we are conscious, deliberate agents rather than complex biological machines running ancient software we didn't write and can't easily modify. Think about the last time you got irrationally angry at someone you love. Perhaps your partner forgot to pick up milk on the way home, and suddenly you're furious times, truly times furious, in a way that seems completely disproportionate to the offense. In the moment, your mind races to justify this anger. This always happens. They never listen. They don't respect my time. This is about more than milk. It's about consideration, about being valued. But is it? Or is the forgotten milk simply the unfortunate trigger for something much older, much deeper? Perhaps a feeling of not being seen that goes back to childhood. Perhaps anxiety about not having your needs met. Perhaps a terror of being left alone with an unbearable feeling. You see, when we engage in this endless scrolling, we are not merely seeking entertainment. We are seeking time's regulation, asterisk. We are outsourcing the management of our internal state to an external mechanism. Think of it this way. A mother soothes her infant not just with milk, but with her presence, her voice, her gaze. The child learns, slowly, to internalize this soothing, to develop what we might call an internal mother, a capacity to comfort oneself. But what happens when this process is disrupted? When the child is left too long with feelings they cannot yet manage? When comfort comes inconsistently, or not at all? They develop what I would call a times deficit in self-soothing asterisk, a hole in the psyche that forever seeks filling from the outside. And here we arrive at something quite profound. Your phone has become a surrogate mother. I do not say this to be provocative. I say it because it is precisely what is happening. When you feel anxious, you reach for your phone. When you feel lonely, you check your notifications. When you feel empty, you scroll through images of other people's lives, seeking what? Connection? Validation? A moment of not feeling what you are feeling? The screen becomes the breast. The notification becomes the nipple. And you, my friend, remain forever in a state of infantile dependency. But unlike the mother who eventually teaches the child to self-soothe, to tolerate discomfort, to sit with difficult feelings, the phone does no such thing. It provides instant gratification, yes, but it provides no growth, no development, no maturation. In fact, it does something far more insidious. It times trains you times to be unable to tolerate discomfort. Each time you reach for it to escape a difficult feeling, you reinforce the neural pathway that says, I cannot bear this alone. And so, the capacity for self-soothing, already perhaps underdeveloped, atrophies further. You become less able to sit with silence, less able to be alone with your thoughts, less able to tolerate the space between stimulus and response that is the very hallmark of human freedom. The great question then becomes, who is in control? Are you using the phone, or is the phone using you? You see, control is an illusion. We treasure most precisely when we have lost it. The alcoholic believes each morning that today will be different. The gambler is certain the next hand will break even. And you tell yourself you can stop scrolling whenever you choose, even as your thumb moves of its own accord, a stranger's thumb, possessed by algorithms you will never see. I have observed something remarkable in my consulting room, though now I must confess, my consulting room has become everywhere, for I watch this drama unfold on trains, in restaurants, at family dinners where no one speaks because everyone is speaking to someone who is not there. The compulsion reveals itself not in the using, but in the time's impossibility of not using asterisk. Ask yourself, can you sit for 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, with your phone in another room? Notice what happens in your body. The restlessness, the phantom vibrations, the sudden conviction that something urgent requires your attention. This is not choice. This is need. And here, we arrive at perhaps the most insidious mechanism of all. These technologies have learned to exploit not our strengths, but our vulnerabilities. They do not appeal to your rational mind, your capacity for reflection, your better angels. No, they target the frightened child within you, the one who fears being left out, being forgotten, being alone. Every notification whispers, "You are wanted. You are included. You are not alone." And in exchange for this temporary balm, you surrender hour after hour of irreplaceable life. The tragedy, and it is a tragedy in the classical sense, is that the more you seek connection through these devices, the more isolated you become. You accumulate friends by the hundreds, yet have no one to call at 3 in the morning when the darkness presses in. You broadcast your life to an audience of thousands, yet no one truly knows you. The persona you project, curated, filtered, perfected, becomes a prison from which your actual self cannot escape. This is what I call the narcissistic wound of the digital age, a peculiar injury that bleeds in silence. You see, the human psyche was never designed to maintain multiple versions of itself simultaneously. Yet this is precisely what your technology demands. There is the self you present to your employer, the self you show your family, the self you perform for strangers on the internet, and buried beneath all these performances, the self you can barely remember being. Each persona requires maintenance, constant vigilance. You must remember which opinions you've expressed where, which aspects of your personality you've emphasized to which audience. It is exhausting work, this management of multiplicity. And in the gaps between these performances, in those rare moments when you are alone with no screen to mediate your existence, you feel something unsettling, a profound uncertainty about which version, if any, represents the truth of who you are. I have treated patients who suffered from what we once called hysteria, a fragmentation of the self, so severe that multiple personalities emerge to protect the psyche from unbearable trauma. What you are experiencing now is different in mechanism, but similar in effect. You have voluntarily fragmented yourself, split your psyche into marketable pieces, and distributed them across platforms. The trauma here is not a single devastating event, but the slow, steady erosion of an integrated identity. And here is the cruelest irony. The more you perform these various selves, the more you forget the original. The authentic you, if such a thing still exists, becomes buried under layers of performance so thick that excavation seems impossible. This is what I call the architecture of forgetting, and social media provides the perfect blueprint. Every platform becomes another room in the house of mirrors, each reflection slightly different, each demanding its own particular performance. You curate one self for the professional network, another for the casual scrollers, yet another for the intimate circle who might see through obvious fabrication. The exhaustion becomes existential. I have observed in my clinical work that the patient who experiences genuine dissociation often describes it as watching themselves from outside, as though operating their own body remotely. Does this not perfectly describe your relationship with your digital avatar? You craft posts, select images, compose captions, all while hovering somewhere above the experience, directing it like a puppeteer. The strings become so numerous you can barely keep them from tangling. And here we encounter what might be the most disturbing element. The likes, the hearts, the approving comments act as intermittent reinforcement of the false self. In my time, I observed how neurotic symptoms often persisted because they provided secondary gains. The invalid who receives attention for their illness develops an unconscious investment in remaining unwell. Your digital performances receive similar reinforcement. Each validation strengthens not your authentic self, but the hollow construction designed to please the invisible audience. You become addicted not to authentic connection, but to the applause for your performance of connection. The self fragments further because different platforms demand different selves. The professional networking site requires the ambitious achiever. The photo-sharing platform wants the aesthetically curated life. The rapid-fire commentary space demands hot takes and tribal allegiances. You split yourself, not out of pathology, but out of necessity. Each platform has its own rules, its own expectations, its own invisible jury judging your worthiness. What I find most fascinating is how awareness of this fragmentation does nothing to stop it. You know you are performing. You recognize the exhaustion. You may even articulate, in moments of clarity, that none of these selves feel entirely real. And yet, despite this awareness, you cannot stop. This is the paradox I observe most frequently in the modern condition. The simultaneous knowledge of the performance and the inability to exit the stage. You see the mechanism clearly, perhaps more clearly than any generation before you, yet the mechanism continues to operate. Why? Because the performance has become load-bearing. Like a flying buttress on a Gothic cathedral, what began as external support has become essential to the structure's integrity. Remove the performance, and you fear the entire edifice of self will collapse. Consider what happens when you attempt to stop performing, even briefly. You post nothing for a day, a week. You decline to document an experience. You choose not to optimize a moment for external consumption. What rises immediately in that silence? Anxiety. A peculiar sense that if you are not performing, you are not existing. That the tree falling in the forest makes no sound, casts no shadow, matters not at all. This is not vanity in the classical sense. The narcissist of my era was convinced of their own magnificence. You are convinced of nothing except perhaps that you must continue the performance to discover whether there is anything beneath it. The performance has become the archaeological dig of your own interior. Each post, each carefully constructed image is both mask and excavation tool. You are simultaneously hiding and searching, concealing and revealing. You curate in hope that through enough curation, an authentic self will emerge, will crystallize from the fragments. But here is what I must tell you. Authenticity cannot be performed into existence. The real self is not found through accumulation of images, but through the courage of singular presence. It exists in the moments you do not document, in the experiences you do not translate into content, in the thoughts you do not immediately externalize. You see, my young friends, I treated a patient once, a woman who kept elaborate journals. She documented everything, her dreams, her meals, her conversations, her moods. She believed this recording would help her understand herself. But when we began our work together, I discovered something curious. The more she wrote, the less she actually felt. The journal had become a barrier between her and her experience, not a bridge to it. She would have an argument with her husband, and before she could truly feel the anger or hurt, she was already composing how she would describe it in her journal. The emotion was being filtered, edited, made presentable even to herself. The raw material of psychic life was being processed before it could even register in consciousness. This is what your digital mirrors do to you now, only amplified 1,000-fold. You experience something beautiful, a sunset, perhaps, or a moment of connection with a friend, and immediately your hand reaches for the device. Not to capture the memory for yourself, but to transmit it outward. The sunset is not fully seen because you are already imagining how others will see it. The friend before you is not fully present because you are already composing the caption that will accompany their image. What you call living your best life is often merely curating evidence of a life you are not actually living. The performance replaces the experience. And in this replacement, something essential is lost, the unmediated encounter with reality that forms the foundation of genuine selfhood. I ask you, When was the last time you allowed yourself to simply be, to exist without broadcasting that existence, to feel something without immediately analyzing how that feeling might be perceived by others? The paradox of your condition is this. In your desperate attempt to be seen, to be validated, to prove your existence through constant documentation, you are actually disappearing. The authentic self, that deep, complex, often contradictory being that you truly are, is being starved of the attention it needs to develop, while a hollow substitute receives all your devotion. What you have created is not a more visible version of yourself. It is a ghost that haunts the space where you should be living, and like all ghosts, it demands constant feeding. It whispers to you each morning, post something, share something, prove that you exist. It measures your worth not in the depth of your experiences, but in their apparent impact on an invisible audience. I have observed something fascinating in my clinical work. Those who are most secure in their sense of self rarely feel the compulsion to broadcast their every achievement, their every meal, their every thought. They carry their identity within them like a quiet certainty. But those who have outsourced their identity to external validation, they panic in silence. A day without posting feels like a day without existing. You have become addicted not to social media itself, but to the temporary relief from existential anxiety that each notification provides. Like the gambler at the machine, you are chasing not pleasure, but the brief cessation of discomfort. The absence of engagement feels like annihilation. And so you post again and again, each time hoping that this will be the one that finally fills the void. But the void cannot be filled from the outside. This is the fundamental truth you must confront. No amount of followers, no viral moment, no cascade of hearts and thumbs-up icons will ever provide the deep, stable sense of self that can only be cultivated through genuine self-reflection and authentic connection. The tragedy is that you know this. Somewhere beneath the performance, beneath the carefully curated facade, you know that what you are doing is not working. You feel the exhaustion of constant self-monitoring. You recognize the sadness that follows scrolling. You notice how empty you feel after an hour of consumption, how anxious you become when your content fails to perform as expected. Yet you cannot stop, because stopping would mean confronting what lies beneath the uncomfortable questions you have been avoiding. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually want, separate from what I think others want me to want? These questions terrify you more than any external threat ever could, because external threats can be fought, escaped, conquered. But internal emptiness? That requires something far more difficult. It requires you to sit with yourself, without distraction, without defense, and face what you find there. And what you often find, initially, is nothing. Not profound spiritual emptiness, but simply absence. The person you thought you were dissolves when the audience leaves. The preferences you believed were yours reveal themselves as borrowed. The dreams you chase turn out to be someone else's script you memorized so well you forgot it wasn't your own. This is what I call the collapse of the false self. And it is, paradoxically, both the most painful and most necessary experience of psychological growth. You see, you have spent years, perhaps decades, constructing an identity designed to win approval, avoid rejection, maintain safety. This constructed self is not evil or wrong. It served a purpose. As a child, you needed to adapt to survive. You learned which behaviors earned love and which brought punishment. You became what your environment required. But now you are no longer that child. The adaptation that once protected you has become a prison. The mask you wear for others you can no longer remove even when alone. You have been performing so long you have forgotten it is a performance. Busyness allows this false self to continue unchallenged. As long as you are racing from task to task, you never have to ask, is this what I times want, or what I was taught to want? Am I living, or simply avoiding death? Am I choosing this life, or is it simply happening to me by default? The man who works 80 hours per week believes he does so for his family's security. But sit him down, force him to be still, and a different truth emerges. He works to avoid his family, to avoid the intimacy he never learned to navigate, to avoid the vulnerability that genuine connection requires. The workaholic tells himself he's building something, he's providing, he's achieving, and perhaps he is, but he's also hiding. The desk becomes a fortress, the schedule becomes a moat, and behind these defenses sits not a man fulfilled, but a man terrified of what he might discover in stillness. I've seen this pattern replicate across generations. The father who worked late every night raises a son who feels invisible. That son swears he'll be different, he'll be present, and yet, when his own children arrive, he finds himself inexplicably drawn to the office, to just one more project, one more promotion, one more proof that he matters. He doesn't realize he's running the same program his father installed. Different job, same escape. Because the original wound wasn't about work, it was about worth. About learning that love must be earned through performance rather than received through presence. About internalizing the terrible belief that who you are isn't enough, only what you do carries value. And here we arrive at repression's greatest trick. It makes you believe you're free, while it's pulling every string. You think you're choosing your career, your relationships, your lifestyle. But how many of these choices are truly yours? How many are simply the ego's attempts to avoid what the unconscious finds intolerable? The man who compulsively chases unavailable partners believes he's unlucky in love. He doesn't see the pattern that he's recreating the emotional distance of his childhood, choosing partners who cannot give him what he never learned to accept. The familiar pain of longing feels safer than the terrifying vulnerability of being truly seen. The woman who cannot accept compliments tells herself she's modest. She doesn't recognize the defense that accepting praise would conflict with the deeply buried belief that she's unworthy. Better to deflect than to challenge the foundation on which her entire identity was built. This is the insidious nature of repression. It operates in the dark, shaping everything, while convincing you that you're the one in control. And so she sits with her pain, medicated but not healed, diagnosed but not understood. The pills become her solution, not because they address the cause, but because they silence the symptom just enough to let her continue the performance. The show must go on. I've watched this pattern repeat itself countless times in my consulting room. The patient arrives with the complaint headaches, fatigue, inexplicable tears, but beneath that complaint lies a question they cannot ask. Asterisk. What if everything I've built is a lie? Asterisk. That question is too dangerous. It threatens the entire architecture of the self. And so, instead, we treat the headaches. We prescribe rest for the fatigue. We call the tears a chemical imbalance and adjust the dosage accordingly. But the question remains, lurking in the shadows, growing stronger with each day it goes unasked. Because repression doesn't eliminate desire, it merely forces it underground, where it ferments and transforms into something far more destructive. Think of it like this. You have a pressure valve, and you keep tightening it, refusing to release even the smallest amount of steam. You tell yourself you're maintaining control, that you're keeping everything contained. But pressure doesn't disappear simply because you refuse to acknowledge it. It builds, it intensifies, and eventually something breaks. The human psyche is no different. When we repress our truths, when we deny our desires, when we construct elaborate defenses against our own nature, we create an internal pressure that must find release somewhere. If not through conscious acknowledgement, then through symptoms. If not through honest conversation, then through the body's rebellion. This is why the woman develops migraines that no medication can fully touch. Why the man experiences panic attacks in shopping malls. Why the teenager cuts herself in private, releasing externally what she cannot express internally.